They laughed when the security guard stopped me at the door of my own building. They thought I was just a senile old man holding a cheap plastic lunchbox. They thought my silence was weakness and my gray hair was a sign of surrender. But 48 hours later, I would stand on a podium in front of the world press and destroy a $2 billion merger with a single sentence. My name is Gerald Dawson, and my wife gave my company my home and even my last name to her lover while I was still alive. But she forgot that before I was a retired husband, I was the shark that built the water she swims in. If you have ever been underestimated by the people you loved the most, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments which city you are watching from. I read every single one. Now let me tell you how my life fell apart on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my year. It was Tuesday morning and the calendar on my phone had a red circle around the date. 35 years. That is how long Catherine and I had been married. Most billionaire wives expect diamonds or a trip to Paris for an anniversary like that. But Catherine was different, or at least I thought she was. For 3 decades, she always said her favorite thing in the world was my homemade Texas-style pork ribs, the ones I marinate for 2 days and slow cook for 6 hours until the meat falls off the bone. So there I was at 10 in the morning, driving my battered 2010 Ford F-150 into the city. The truck rattled every time I hit a pothole. It has rust on the bumper and the air conditioning barely works, but I love it. It keeps me grounded. I pulled up to the gleaming glass tower of Origen Biopharma. The building soared 50 stories into the sky, reflecting the clouds. I remember buying the land this building stands on 20 years ago, when it was just a muddy lot. I remember signing the checks for the steel and the glass. I remember stepping back to let Catherine cut the ribbon, because I wanted her to shine. I wanted her to be the face of the future, while I stayed in the shadows. I parked the truck in the visitor section because I did not want to take up an executive spot. I grabbed the thermal container filled with the hot ribs and walked toward the revolving doors. I checked my reflection in the glass. My windbreaker was old and a bit faded. My jeans were comfortable but worn at the knees. I looked like a delivery driver or maybe a janitor. I did not look like the man who silently funded the entire operation. I walked up to the security turnstile. I reached into my wallet and pulled out my old white access card, the one that said founder on the back in small gold letters. I tapped it against the reader. Nothing happened. A red light flashed. I tapped it again. Still red. "Excuse me, sir." I looked up. A security guard was standing over me. His name tag read Mike. He looked young, maybe 25, with muscles bulging out of a uniform that was too tight. He had that look of arrogance that young men get when they are given a tiny bit of authority. "You cannot be in here with outside food," he said, pointing at my container. "Deliveries go to the back loading dock." I smiled, trying to be patient. "I am not a delivery driver's son. I am here to see Catherine Dawson, the CEO. It is our anniversary. My badge seems to be demagnetized. If you could just buzz me through or call up to her office, she will clear this up in a second." Mike looked me up and down. He took in the old jacket, the gray stubble on my chin, and the plastic container. He let out a short, sharp laugh. "Right. You are here to see the CEO, and I am here to see the president. Look, Pops, we get crazy people in here every week trying to pitch ideas or beg for money. Do yourself a favor and leave before I have to escort you out." It is embarrassing. I felt a flash of irritation, but I pushed it down. I kept my voice calm. "I am not crazy, Mike. My name is Gerald Dawson. I am Catherine Dawson's husband." That is when it happened. The moment that split my reality into 2 pieces. Mike did not just say no. He laughed. A loud, genuine belly laugh that echoed in the marble lobby. He shook his head, wiping a tear from his eye. "That is a new one. That is really rich. You are her husband." Okay, old-timer. You want to see her husband? Look. He pointed a thick finger toward the wall of elevators behind me. I turned around. The golden doors of the private executive elevator slid open with a soft chime. And there she was, Catherine. She looked magnificent. She was wearing a cream-colored power suit that cost more than my truck. Her hair was perfectly styled and she radiated authority. But she was not alone. Standing next to her with his arm casually wrapped around her waist was Preston Hayes, the new chief operating officer. He was 45 years old, tall, handsome in a slick, superficial way, and wearing a navy blue suit that fit him like a second skin. I stood there, frozen, holding my box of ribs. I watched as they stepped out of the elevator. They were laughing at something private, a shared joke, the way lovers laugh. I wanted to call out to her. I wanted to wave and say, "Happy anniversary, honey." But something stopped me. It was the way she looked at him. In 35 years, Catherine had never looked at me like that, not even on our wedding day. She looked at him with a mixture of adoration and submission. She reached up and adjusted his silk tie, smoothing it down over his chest. Her hand lingered there, patting his lapel. Then right there in the middle of the lobby, where any employee could see, she leaned in and kissed him on the cheek. It was not a friendly peck. It was intimate, lingering. My stomach dropped. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. "Good morning, Mr. Dawson," a receptionist chirped as she walked past them. "Good morning, Mr. Dawson," a junior executive said, nodding respectfully at Preston. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands started to shake and the handle of the thermal container rattled. "Did you hear that?" Mike the guard whispered, leaning close to my ear, his voice dripping with mockery. They called him Mr. Dawson. That is the CEO's husband, Preston Dawson. Everyone knows him. He is the one who runs this place, not some old guy with a box of leftovers. I could not breathe. Preston Hayes. He was using my name. He was using my wife. He was walking through my lobby like he owned the place. I watched them walk toward the exit. The automatic doors slid open, and the morning sun hit them like a spotlight. A black Bentley pulled up to the curb. It was the car I had bought for Catherine last Christmas. Preston opened the door for her, but before she got in, he whispered something in her ear and squeezed her lower back. She giggled, a girlish sound I had not heard in decades. I stood there invisible, a ghost in my own life. The woman I had dedicated my entire existence to was getting into my car with a man who was wearing my life like a costume. "You better get going, Pops," Mike said, stepping in front of me, blocking my view. "Before I call the cops for trespassing." I looked at Mike. I looked at the closed glass doors where my wife had just vanished. I looked down at the box of ribs that suddenly felt heavy and ridiculous. I did not scream. I did not make a scene. I did not throw the food at the guard. The old Gerald might have cried. The old Gerald might have begged for an explanation. But in that moment, standing on the cold marble floor, something inside me snapped. It was a quiet snap, like a dry twig breaking in a winter forest. The part of me that was the gentle, supportive husband died right there in the lobby. And the part of me that was the cold, calculated businessman, the shark I had buried 30 years ago, opened its eyes. I tightened my grip on the lunchbox. I looked Mike dead in the eye. "You are right, son," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I made a mistake. It won't happen again." I turned around and walked out. But I did not go home to cry. I went to my truck and I picked up my phone. I dialed Catherine's number. I needed to hear her lie to me. I needed to know exactly how deep the rot went. Because if they wanted to treat me like a stranger, they were about to find out that a stranger is the most dangerous person of all. I sat in the cab of my Ford F-150, and the smell of barbecue sauce that used to make my mouth water now made me feel sick. The leather of the steering wheel was cold under my hands. I watched them through the windshield, like I was watching a movie of my own life. but someone else had been cast in the lead role. I was parked about 50 yards away in the visitor lot. From here, the glass front of the building acted like a giant screen. I could see everything. The way the sunlight hit Catherine's hair. The way Preston leaned in close to say something that made her throw her head back and laugh. I took my phone out of my pocket. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped. It had been replaced by a cold numbness that started in my chest and spread to my fingertips. I dialed her number. I watched her reach into her purse. I saw her look at the screen. I saw the moment she recognized my name. Her smile faded instantly. She said something to Preston. He smirked and checked his watch. She held up a finger to him, a gesture that meant, "Wait a second." Then she answered, "Hey, honey." Her voice was breathless. It was the voice she used when she was trying to sound stressed and busy. It was a performance I had heard 1,000 times before, but I had never seen the backstage reality until now. "Happy anniversary, Catherine," I said. I kept my voice flat. I wanted to give her a chance, a tiny sliver of a chance to tell the truth. "Where are you?" "Oh, Gerald, I am so sorry." I watched her through the glass. She was not sorry. She was fixing Preston's collar again, brushing a piece of lint off his shoulder, with a familiarity that screamed ownership. "I am completely swamped," she said. "The board meeting ran long, and we are in the middle of a crisis with the FDA approval for the new heart medication. I barely have time to breathe, let alone eat. I don't think I am going to make it home for dinner tonight." I gripped the phone tighter. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. If I had been at home sitting in my armchair, I would have believed her. I would have worried about her. I would have told her to make sure she ate something. I would have been the supportive husband waiting up with a cup of tea. But I was not at home. I was 50 yards away, watching her run her hand down the arm of her lover. "That sounds stressful," I said. "You are still in the conference room then?" "Yes," she said. "We are locked in here. It is going to be a long night. I might have to sleep on the couch in my office. Don't wait up for me, okay?" I watched as Preston leaned in and whispered something in her ear. She giggled. It was a sound that twisted a knife in my gut. Then right there in front of the employees passing by, she leaned up and kissed him. It was not a goodbye kiss. It was a promise. It was soft and lingering on the cheek, but her hand was on his chest, pulling him closer. "I understand," I said. "The work comes first. It always has. You are the best, Gerald. You always understand. I have to go now. The investors are waiting." Love you too," I said. The line went dead. So I lowered the phone, but I did not take my eyes off them. The investors were not waiting. The valet was. A black car pulled up to the curb. It was a Bentley Continental GT. The sunlight gleamed off its polished black paint. I knew that car. I knew every inch of it. I had spent 3 months researching it, customizing the interior with the specific shade of cream leather she liked. I had surprised her with it on her 57th birthday. I remembered the way she had screamed with joy. I remembered how she had hugged me and told me I was the most generous man in the world. Now I watched Preston open the passenger door for her. He did it with a flourish, like he was a prince and she was his queen. She slid into the seat. The seat I paid for. The seat where she used to hold my hand on long drives up the coast. Preston walked around the front of the car. He moved with a swagger that made my jaw clench. He got into the driver's seat. He was driving my wife in my car to a bed that I probably paid for too. As the Bentley pulled away, merging into the city traffic, I felt a strange shift in my perception. It was not just anger. Anger is hot. Anger is messy. This was something colder. It was clarity. For the last 10 years, I had been making myself smaller. I had stepped back from the company, because Catherine said she wanted to prove she could do it on her own. I had stopped coming to office parties because she said my presence made the younger staff nervous. I had slowly erased myself from the narrative of our success. I thought I was being a supportive partner. I thought I was being a good husband. But as I watched the taillights of the Bentley disappear around the corner, I realized the truth. I had not been supportive. I had been convenient. I was the bank account that never ran dry. I was the safety net that never complained. And now that she had Preston, she did not need the safety net anymore. She was not just cheating on me. She was replacing me. She was erasing me. I looked at the thermal container on the passenger seat next to me. The ribs were probably still warm. I thought about the hours I spent preparing them, the dry rub I mixed by hand, the slow fire, the care. It all seemed so pathetic now. I was a pathetic old man with a box of meat trying to buy the attention of a woman who had already sold my spot to a younger model. But then I looked in the rearview mirror. I saw my own eyes. They were tired, yes. They had wrinkles around the corners. But the eyes themselves were not the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of Gerald Dawson, the man who had taken a small family pharmacy and turned it into a billion-dollar empire before he turned 40. The man who had negotiated deals that made grown men cry in boardrooms. I had buried that man for Catherine. I had put him to sleep because I thought love was more important than power. But Catherine did not want love. She wanted power, and she had made a fatal calculation error. She thought because I was silent, I was weak. She thought because I was old, I was stupid. She thought she could take the life I built and hand it to a boy who had never built anything in his life. I started the engine of the truck. The old V8 roared to life, a rough, unpolished sound that felt perfect for the moment. I was not going to follow them. I did not need to catch them in the act. I had seen enough. The time for observation was over. The time for action was coming. But first I had to go home. I had to walk into that empty house and look at the life she had left behind. I had to look at the photos on the mantelpiece. I had to look at the bills on the desk. I had to see exactly how deep the rot went. I put the truck in gear. I drove out of the parking lot past the security guard Mike, who was still standing there, probably laughing about the old man he had kicked out. I didn't look at him. He didn't matter. He was just a pawn. I was going after the queen. The drive home was a blur. My mind was racing not with emotions, but with numbers, dates, contracts, signatures. I tried to remember the last time I signed something Catherine put in front of me without reading it. There was the trust fund amendment last year. There was the property transfer for the beach house. There were the tax returns. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I had trusted her. I had trusted her implicitly. I had signed whatever she asked because why would I doubt the woman who had shared my bed for 35 years? God, I was a fool. I pulled into the driveway of our estate. It was a sprawling mansion that looked like something out of a magazine. It was beautiful and cold. It had no soul. I parked the truck next to the empty spot where the Bentley should have been. I walked into the house. It was silent, the kind of silence that rings in your ears. I walked into the kitchen and put the box of ribs on the marble counter. I opened the lid. The smell of the barbecue sauce filled the empty room. It smelled like failure. I grabbed a fork and took a bite. It was delicious. The meat was tender. The sauce was perfectly balanced. It was the best batch I had ever made. I ate alone, standing in the middle of the kitchen. I ate until I felt the strength coming back into my body. Then I threw the rest in the trash. I washed the container and put it away. I walked into the living room and sat in my leather armchair, the one in the corner that Catherine always said was too ugly for the room. I sat there as the sun went down and the shadows stretched across the floor. I did not turn on the lights. I sat in the dark and waited. I was not waiting for her to come home. I knew she wouldn't. I was waiting for the old Gerald to finish waking up. I closed my eyes and let the memories of the last 30 years wash over me. I sifted through them, looking for the cracks, looking for the moment when she stopped loving me and started using me. I realized with a jolt that it wasn't recent. It wasn't just Preston. Preston was just a symptom. The disease had been there for a long time. The way she rolled her eyes when I told a story. The way she stopped asking my advice on business matters. The way she slowly separated our finances. She had been planning this. Maybe not consciously at first, but the instinct was there. She was a predator, and I had been the prey who walked willingly into her mouth. But prey can be dangerous too if you don't kill it fast enough. I opened my eyes. The room was pitch black now. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Tick-tock, tick-tock. I stood up. My knees popped, but I didn't feel the pain. I felt energized. I walked to the stairs. I was going to her study. I was going to find the truth. And when I found it, I was going to use it to burn her world to the ground. Tonight, Gerald the husband died. Tonight, Gerald the silent partner was born. And he was not going to be silent anymore. The grandfather clock in the hallway struck 10 times. Each chime felt like a hammer hitting a nail into the coffin of my marriage. I was sitting at the head of the long mahogany dining table. The room was dim, lit only by the sconces on the wall. In front of me, the crystal wine glass was empty, and the silver cutlery was cold to the touch. The house was silent. It was a big house, too big for two people who had stopped speaking the same language years ago. I heard the heavy front door open. The alarm system beeped twice, signaling that the Queen had returned to her castle. I did not get up. I stayed in my chair, my hands folded on the placemat, waiting. I heard the click of her high heels on the marble floor. It was a sharp, aggressive sound. She was walking fast, not like a woman coming home to rest, but like a woman who was still running a race. Catherine walked into the dining room. She stopped when she saw me. For a split second, I saw a flash of annoyance cross her face. She quickly covered it up with a mask of exhaustion. She dropped her designer bag onto one of the side chairs and sighed. It was a theatrical sigh, loud and designed to elicit sympathy. "You are still up," she said. Her voice was scratchy. "I was waiting for you," I said. I kept my tone neutral. "I made you a plate." I gestured to the covered dish on the table. She did not even look at it. She walked over to the sideboard and poured herself a glass of water. As she passed me, the air shifted. She was not wearing her usual floral perfume. The scent that hit me was sharp, woody, and undeniably masculine. It was Santal 33. I knew that smell. It was the trendy scent of every young, ambitious executive in the city. It was the smell of expensive leather and sandalwood and arrogance. It was the smell of Preston Hayes. It was clinging to her hair. It was on her silk blouse. It was so strong that it made my eyes water. "I am not hungry," she said, taking a sip of water. "We had sandwiches brought into the boardroom. I just want to take a shower and collapse." I stood up slowly. I walked over to her. I saw her stiffen. She thought I was going to hug her. Instead, I reached out and gently took her coat from her shoulders. I was playing the role of the dutiful husband, the servant. "You smell like men's cologne," I said softly. I watched her reflection in the mirror above the sideboard. She did not flinch. She did not panic. She was a professional. She turned around and looked me in the eye. Her face was calm, but her eyes were cold. "Oh, that," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "That is Preston. We were stuck in that small conference room for 6 hours. The ventilation system is broken. We were practically sitting on top of each other looking at spreadsheets. His cologne must have rubbed off on everyone. It is awful, isn't it?" I held her coat in my hands. It was still warm. "I saw you this morning, Catherine," I said. I decided to test the waters. I decided to give her a little bit of rope to see if she would hang herself. I came to the office to bring you lunch. I saw you leaving with him. You did not look like you were going to a board meeting. The room went very quiet. Catherine put her glass down. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and frustration. It was the look a teacher gives a slow student who just doesn't understand the lesson. Gerald, please, she said, do we really have to do this tonight? I am exhausted. You were holding his hand, I said. You kissed him. Catherine let out a short, sharp laugh. She walked over to the table and leaned against it, crossing her arms. She looked at me like I was a child. Sit down, Gerald. I remained standing. Sit down, she repeated sharply. I sat. She took a deep breath. This is it, I thought. She is going to confess. She is going to tell me it is over, but she didn't. Instead, she did something much worse. She twisted reality. You want to know the truth, she said. Fine, I will tell you the truth, but you are not going to like it because you are too old-fashioned to understand how modern business works. She began to pace around the room. Origen is in a critical phase. We are trying to attract a new wave of investors. Silicon Valley money, Gen Z funds. These people do not trust old traditional companies. They want disruption. They want energy. They want sex appeal. She stopped and pointed at me. Look at you, Gerald. You are 72 years old. You wear cardigans. You drive a truck that belongs on a farm. If I put you on the cover of Forbes magazine, our stock would drop 10% overnight. The market hates age. The market hates weakness. I gripped the armrests of my chair. So Preston is what I asked. A prop. Exactly, she said. Preston is 45. He is handsome. He is aggressive. He speaks their language. When we walk into a room together, we project power. We project the future. Yes, I hold his hand. Yes, I smile at him. It is a performance, Gerald. It is branding. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that was meant to sound confidential. I am doing this for the company. I am doing this for us. Do you think I enjoy having to flirt with a man 20 years younger than me? Do you think I like pretending to be something I am not? It is exhausting. It is humiliating. But I do it because it brings in the capital. I sacrifice my dignity every single day to keep this roof over your head and to keep your golf club membership paid. I looked at her. I looked at the woman I had built a world for. She was looking at me with righteous indignation. She truly believed her own narrative. Or at least she believed I was stupid enough to buy it. So when you kissed him, I said quietly, that was for the shareholders. She rolled her eyes. It was a cheek kiss, Gerald. Don't be dramatic. In Europe, everyone greets like that. You have been out of the game for so long, you have forgotten how human beings interact. You have become paranoid. You sit in this big house all day with nothing to do but invent scenarios in your head. She walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy. You should be thanking me, she said. I am out there in the trenches fighting to protect our legacy. I am taking the hits. I am playing the game so you don't have to. You get to retire. You get to rest. And instead of gratitude, I come home to an interrogation about perfume. She pulled her hand away and shook her head. I am disappointed in you, Gerald. I thought you were more secure than this. Gaslighting. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. She had taken her infidelity and turned it into a virtue. She had taken my valid suspicion and turned it into a sign of my mental decline. She was telling me that my eyes were lying, that my nose was lying, and that my gut instinct was just the paranoia of a senile old man. I looked down at the table. I needed her to think she had won. I needed her to think I was broken. "I am sorry," I mumbled. "I did not realize." She sighed again, but this time it was a sigh of victory. "It is okay," she said, softening her tone. "I know it is hard for you. Changes are hard when you get older. Just trust me, Gerald. Leave the business to me and Preston. We know what we are doing." She picked up her bag. "I am going to bed. Do not stay up late. You know you get confused when you don't sleep enough." She walked out of the room. I listened to her footsteps fade away up the stairs. I listened to the bedroom door close. I sat there in the silence. The smell of Santal 33 was still lingering in the air. It was a ghost of the man who was sleeping with my wife. She thought she had silenced me. She thought she had put the old dog back in his kennel. She thought that by attacking my age, she could dismantle my confidence. But she was wrong. She had just given me the most valuable piece of information yet. She had told me exactly what she was afraid of. She was afraid of the stock price dropping. She was afraid of losing the image of the perfect power couple. She was afraid of the investors finding out that the foundation of her company was built on lies. She said I was too old. She said I was a liability. I looked at my hands. They were wrinkled, yes, but they were the hands that had signed the incorporation papers of Origin 30 years ago. They were the hands that had written the code of ethics that she was currently using as toilet paper. I stood up. I picked up the plate of food I had made for her. I walked into the kitchen and scraped it into the garbage disposal. The sound of the machine grinding the bones was loud and violent. I was not going to sleep. I had work to do. If she wanted to play the game of stock prices and public image, then I would play along. But I wasn't going to play by her rules. I walked into the library and turned on my computer. I did not turn on the main lights. The glow of the screen illuminated my face. I opened a new browser window. She said she was doing this for the company. She said she was protecting our legacy. I started typing. I needed to see exactly how she was protecting it. I needed to see the numbers, because numbers do not lie. Numbers do not wear perfume. Numbers do not gaslight you. The night was just beginning, and for the first time in years, I felt completely awake. I sat in the sunroom the next morning with the Wall Street Journal spread out on my lap. The paper felt crisp and real in my hands. It was a habit I had never given up. There is something about the smell of ink and the rustle of the pages that helps me think. The digital world is too fast, too ephemeral. But print is a commitment. The sun was streaming through the bay windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It should have been a peaceful morning. But the peace was shattered the moment my daughter Mallory walked into the room. She didn't say good morning. She didn't ask how I slept. The first sound I heard was the sharp click of her tongue against the roof of her mouth. "Seriously, Dad?" I looked up over my reading glasses. Mallory was standing there dressed in a sharp gray pantsuit that looked like armor. She was holding a tablet in one hand and a green smoothie in the other. Her hair was pulled back so tight it looked painful. She was 28 years old, but in that moment she looked older, harder. "You are still reading that garbage," she said, gesturing at my newspaper with her tablet. "It is 2024, Dad. That news is already 24 hours old. By the time you read it, the market has already moved 3 times. I folded the paper slowly. I remembered teaching her to read using the Sunday comics section of this very newspaper. I remembered her sitting on my lap, tracing the letters with her tiny finger. Now she looked at the paper like it was a contagious disease. "It helps me focus," I said calmly. "Besides, I like to verify facts before I react to them. The internet tends to be a bit hysterical." Mallory rolled her eyes. She walked over to the coffee machine and started tapping buttons aggressively. "That is your problem, Dad. You are too slow. You think the world is going to wait for you to verify facts. It is all about speed now. Adapt or die. That is what Preston always says. Preston. The name hung in the air like a bad smell. It was the second time in 12 hours that my family had used that man's name as a weapon against me. Is that right? I said, taking a sip of my black coffee. And what else does Preston say? He says we need to cut the dead weight, Mallory said, turning around to face me. She leaned against the counter, sipping her green sludge. He says Origen has been carrying too much emotional baggage. We need to be lean. We need to be ruthless. She looked me right in the eye when she said dead weight. She didn't have to say my name. The implication was clear enough. I decided to change the subject. I wanted to see if there was any part of my daughter left in there. Any part of the little girl who used to cry when her goldfish died. Do you know what today is, Mallory? I asked. She glanced at her Apple Watch. Wednesday, she said. I have a strategy meeting at 10 and a lunch with the branding team at 12. It is the 10th of October, I said. It is your grandfather's death anniversary. I was thinking we could go to the cemetery together, just for 20 minutes. He loved you very much, Mal. He left you his entire library. For a second, I saw a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by that mask of corporate coldness. Dad, please. I don't have time to go look at a stone. Grandpa is dead. He doesn't know if I am there or not. Besides, I have to prep for the presentation with Preston. This is the future of the company we are talking about. She walked over to the sofa and sat down on the edge as if she couldn't wait to leave. You are always living in the past, she muttered. That is why Mom is so stressed. She has to carry the weight of the future while you are busy mourning people who have been gone for 20 years. You should be grateful she works so hard so you can sit here and read your paper. The words stung. They were meant to. She had been poisoned against me. Slowly, systematically over the years, they had turned me into a caricature of a burden. Mallory put her smoothie down on the coffee table. She reached into her leather portfolio and pulled out a thin stack of papers. Her demeanor changed instantly. She softened. She put on a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Actually, Dad, since you are just sitting here, I need a favor. She slid the papers across the table toward me. She also produced a pen, a heavy, expensive Mont Blanc that I had given her for her graduation. Mom and I were talking, she said, her voice taking on a sweet, condescending tone. We are worried about you. You have been so forgetful lately, like forgetting the alarm code last week and getting lost on the way to the club. I hadn't forgotten the alarm code. Catherine had changed it without telling me, and I hadn't gotten lost. There was construction on the main road. But facts didn't matter in their narrative. So we want to make sure you are covered, she continued. This is just some updated paperwork for your health insurance. It makes sure that if anything happens, if you fall or have an episode, you get the best care immediately. VIP suite, private nurses, everything. She tapped the paper with her manicured fingernail. Just sign right there at the bottom. The X. I looked at the document. The title at the top said, Medical Care Authorization, in big bold letters. It looked standard. Most people would have signed it without thinking, especially if their daughter asked them to. But I am not most people, and I had spent 40 years reading contracts that were designed to hide the truth. I reached for my reading glasses and put them on slowly. Let me just take a look, I said. Mallory let out an exaggerated sigh. Dad, it is standard boilerplate. Mom's lawyers drew it up. Do you really think we are trying to trick you? It is for your own good. I am going to be late for my meeting with Preston. Just give me a minute, sweetheart. I scanned the first page. It was full of medical jargon. But then my eyes drift to paragraph 4, subsection B. The font size dropped from 12 point to 8 point. It was tiny, cramped text. I read the words, and my blood ran cold. Hereby grants the designated guardian full power of attorney over all financial and legal decisions in the event of cognitive decline as determined by a single physician. Cognitive decline. A single physician. They didn't need a court order. They didn't need a panel of experts. They just needed one doctor. A doctor like the one Catherine had invited over last night. If I signed this, I was handing them the keys to my life. They could declare me incompetent tomorrow, sell my shares, and lock me away in a facility, and I wouldn't be able to do a thing about it. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just greed. This was betrayal of the highest order. My own daughter, my flesh and blood, was trying to trick me into signing away my freedom. I looked at Mallory. She was checking her phone, tapping her foot impatiently. She didn't look like a monster. She looked like my little girl. But she was holding a pen like a dagger. "Dad, come on," she snapped. "Just sign it. I needed time."
Yeah.
I couldn't confront her yet. Not until I had the golden share secured. Not until I had the evidence. If I refused to sign now, she would know I was onto them all. She would warn Catherine and Preston. They would accelerate their plans. I needed a distraction. I needed to play the role they had cast me in. The clumsy, senile old man. I reached for the pen with my right hand. But with my left hand, the hand holding the mug of hot black coffee, I made a calculated movement. I allowed a tremor to run through my arm. A spasm. "Whoops," I said. My hand jerked. The mug tipped over. The dark, hot liquid splashed across the table. It soaked into the white rug. And most importantly, it poured directly onto the stack of papers. Dad, Mallory shrieked. She jumped up, backing away to save her suit. "Look what you did," she yelled. "You are such a mess." That was an original document. I stood up, acting flustered. I grabbed some napkins and started dabbing ineffectively at the sodden papers. The ink was already running, the words, "power of attorney," blurring into a black stain. "I am so sorry." "Mal," I stammered, making my voice sound weak and shaky. My hand. It just slipped. I don't know what is happening to me lately. I am so clumsy. Mallory looked at me with pure disgust. There was no concern, no asking if I had burned myself, just disgust. "God, you are impossible," she said. "Mom was right. You really are losing it." She snatched the wet, dripping papers from my hand and threw them into the trash can. "I have to go," she said, grabbing her bag. "I can't deal with this right now. Preston is waiting. I will have the lawyers print another copy. Just try not to destroy the house before I get back, okay?" She stormed out of the room. I heard the front door slam. I stood there in the middle of the mess. The coffee was dripping onto the expensive Persian rug. I stopped shaking. I straightened my back. I looked at the trash can where the unsigned contract lay. I had bought myself 24 hours, maybe less. She thought I was clumsy. She thought I was losing it. Good. Let them think that. Let them underestimate me. I walked over to the window and watched her drive away in her red Porsche. Another car I had paid for. "You chose the wrong side, Mallory," I whispered to the empty room. "You chose the money, but you forgot where the money came from." I turned away from the window. I had to clean up the rug, and then I had to go see a lawyer. The real game was just beginning, and I was done playing defense. The house was dead silent at 2 a.m. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the rhythmic settling of the wooden beams that held up the roof. I stood outside the double oak doors of Catherine's home office. My hand hovered over the brass handle. For 30 years, I had respected this room as her sanctuary. I never entered without knocking. I never disturbed her when the door was closed. But tonight, I wasn't her husband. I was an auditor, and auditors do not knock. I turned the handle slowly, praying the hinges wouldn't squeak. The door swung open, revealing a room bathed in the soft blue light of the moon filtering through the sheer curtains. The air inside smelled of her lavender room spray and the faint lingering scent of that damn sandalwood cologne. It made my stomach tighten, but I pushed the nausea down. I wasn't here to sniff for affairs. I was here to follow the money. I walked over to her desk. It was a massive piece of furniture, imported Italian walnut, that I had bought for her when Origen went public. It was clean. Too clean. Not a single paper out of place. Catherine was always meticulous. She believed that a cluttered desk meant a cluttered mind. But I knew that true chaos often hid behind a facade of perfect order. I sat down in her leather executive chair. It felt foreign. I woke up the computer monitor. The screen glowed to life, demanding a password. I stared at the prompt. Most husbands would guess anniversaries or birthdays. Catherine was smarter than that. But she was also arrogant. She used passwords that affirmed her self-image. I tried Queen B1. Incorrect. I tried Success 2024. Incorrect. Then I thought about what she had said at dinner. About power. About the future. I typed unstoppable. Access granted. The desktop icons appeared. I didn't go for her email first. I went straight for the financial drive. I knew the architecture of this network because I was the one who designed it. Back when we started, I built the server protocols myself. Catherine thought I was just tinkering with wires, but I was building a fortress. And like any good architect, I left a back door. I navigated through the folders, bypassing the standard accounting files that the board saw every quarter. I went into the subdirectories, the ones labeled miscellaneous or admin expenses. This is where the bodies are usually buried. I pulled up the vendor payments for the last 6 months. My eyes scanned the rows of numbers. Rent, utilities, R&D materials, legal retainers. And then I saw it. It was a recurring payment. $50,000 a month. The recipient was listed as PHY Consulting. I clicked on the vendor details. The address was a P.O. box in Delaware. The authorized signatory was Preston Hayes. I let out a low breath. $50,000. That was $600,000 a year. She was paying her lover a fortune disguised as consulting fees. It was bold. It was stupid. But it wasn't illegal. A CEO has discretion over consultant contracts. If this was all I found, I could embarrass her, but I couldn't destroy her. I needed more. I needed something that crossed the line from unethical to criminal. I minimized the financial window and opened her email client. I didn't look at the inbox. The inbox is for noise. The truth lives in the drafts folder. People write things they are afraid to send. They vent. They plan. They hesitate. There were 3 drafts. The first was a complaint to the caterer. The second was a note to her yoga instructor. The third had no subject line. It was addressed to a man named Arthur Sterling. I knew Arthur. He was a lawyer who specialized in offshore asset protection. The kind of lawyer you hire when you want to hide money from the IRS or an ex-husband. I opened the email. My heart didn't just break reading it. It stopped. Arthur, the email began. We need to accelerate the transfer of the patent portfolio for the new synthesis algorithm. As discussed, we are moving the ownership to the holding company in the Cayman Islands. Preston has already set up the shell entity under the name Phoenix Rising. We need to execute the deed of assignment before the end of the month. Once the IP is offshore, we can proceed with the sale of Origen's operating assets. The old man is becoming a liability, but I have a plan to neutralize him legally. I need the papers ready for signature by Friday. I sat back in the chair, stunned. The room suddenly felt very cold. This wasn't just embezzlement. This was a gutting. They were planning to strip the company of its most valuable asset, the intellectual property that was the core of everything we built. They were going to transfer the patents to a company they owned, leaving Origin as an empty shell. Then they would sell the hollowed-out company to investors, pocket the sale price, and keep the patents for themselves. And the line about neutralizing me. I have a plan to neutralize him legally. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together with terrifying clarity. The medical care authorization Mallory tried to make me sign. The doctor asking me trick questions. The gaslighting about my memory. They weren't just trying to get me out of the way. They were building a legal case to declare me incompetent. If I was declared mentally unfit, I couldn't challenge the transfer of assets. I couldn't stop them from robbing the shareholders blind. They were going to lock me away in a nursing home, drooling and medicated, while they lived like kings on the beaches of the Cayman Islands, with my money and my life's work. I felt a surge of rage so pure and hot, it almost made me dizzy. I looked at the screen. This draft email was the smoking gun, but it wasn't enough. A draft isn't a crime. They could claim they never sent it. They could claim it was just a brainstorming exercise. I needed to see if they had already started the process. I went back to the file directory. I searched for Phoenix Rising. Nothing. I tried Cayman. Nothing. Then I remembered Preston. He was arrogant. He wouldn't trust Catherine's computer. He would want to keep his own records. But he was also lazy. He was using the company network. I opened the network administrator tools. I scanned the connected devices. There it was. Preston MacBook Pro. It was currently offline, but his user folder on the shared server was accessible. I clicked on it. It was password protected. I cracked my knuckles. This was the part I used to love back in the M&A days, breaking into the data rooms of rival companies to find the dirt they were hiding. I ran a brute force script on the password. It took 3 minutes. The password was Catherine 1. Pathetic. I opened his folder, and there it was, a PDF file titled IP Assignment Agreement Executed. I opened it. It was signed. It was dated yesterday. Catherine had already signed over the rights to the core patents to Preston's shell company. She had given him everything. The only thing missing was the board's ratification, which they were planning to fake or force through once I was out of the picture. I pulled a USB drive from my pocket. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I copied the PDF. I copied the bank statements showing the payments to his consulting firm. I copied the draft email. I had them. I had them cold. This was fraud. This was breach of fiduciary duty. This was conspiracy. This was enough to send them both to federal prison for 20 years. I ejected the drive and slipped it into my pocket. It felt heavy like a loaded gun. I shut down the computer, wiping my recent file history. I stood up and pushed the chair back exactly the way it was. I smoothed the leather. I looked around the room one last time. It looked the same as when I entered. The lavender smell was still there. The moon was still shining through the curtains. But everything had changed. The woman who sat in this chair was no longer my wife. She was my target. I walked out of the room and closed the door silently. As I walked back down the hallway to the guest room, where I had been sleeping lately, I felt a strange sense of calm. The confusion was gone. The hurt was gone. All that was left was the mission. They wanted to neutralize the old man. They wanted to play hardball. Fine. I wasn't going to just neutralize them. I was going to obliterate them, and I was going to vow their own greed to do it. I checked my watch. It was 3:15 in the morning. The sun would be up in 3 hours. I needed to get some sleep. I had a big day ahead of me. I had a lawyer to visit, and I had a trap to spring. Sleep well, Catherine, I whispered into the darkness, because tomorrow your nightmare begins. The morning sun over the Emerald Hills Golf Club was blinding, but the air was crisp and smelled of freshly cut fescue grass and expensive fertilizer. I knew this smell better than I knew the smell of my own backyard. I had served as the honorary president of this club for 15 years. I had personally approved the design of the back nine. I knew every bunker, every water hazard, and every hidden break on the greens. But today, I was not walking the fairways as a member. I was not Gerald Dawson, the esteemed founder of Origin. I was just an old man in a faded beige windbreaker and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, standing near the maintenance shed by the 18th hole. To the wealthy members passing by in their electric carts, I was invisible. I was part of the scenery, just like the oak trees and the sand traps. They looked right through me. It was a perfect disguise because arrogance acts like a blinder. When you think you are the masters of the universe, you stop noticing the people who keep your world turning. I was there for one reason: Preston Hayes. I knew he played here every Wednesday morning. I had seen the charges on the company credit card listed under client development. He wasn't developing clients. He was developing his ego. I watched as his foursome approached the 18th tee. Preston was wearing a bright neon polo shirt that looked ridiculous against the classic green of the course. He was laughing loudly, a barking sound that grated on my nerves. He was with 3 other men, young executives from rival firms, the kind of sycophants who circle money like sharks circling blood. I moved closer, pretending to inspect a sprinkler head near the cart path. I was close enough to hear their voices clearly. "So is it a done deal?" one of the men asked, leaning on his driver. "Are you guys really selling to the Japanese?" Preston took a practice swing. His form was terrible. All upper body, no hip rotation. He was trying to muscle the ball instead of finessing it. It told me everything I needed to know about how he ran my company. "It is 99% done," Preston said, smirking. "We are just waiting for one little signature." The wife asked another man. Preston laughed again. "Catherine. No, she is on board. She does whatever I tell her. She's practically eating out of my hand. The woman is obsessed with me. It is actually kind of pathetic how easy it was." My hand tightened around the handle of the rake I was holding. I felt the rough wood dig into my palm. "No, I mean the old man," the first man asked. "Isn't he still the majority shareholder? I heard he can block the sale." Preston stepped up to the ball. He addressed it with a cocky swagger. Gerald Preston said, spitting my name out like it was a piece of bad meat. "Don't worry about him. The guy is a vegetable. He is losing his marbles. We have a doctor lined up to declare him mentally incompetent by the end of the week. He will be in a luxury memory care facility before the ink dries on the contract." He swung. The club head made contact with a hollow thwack. The ball sliced hard to the right, heading straight for the rough. "Damn it," Preston muttered. "Nice shot, boss," one of his lackeys lied. Preston walked back to the cart, his chest puffed out. Besides, he continued grabbing a bottle of water. Even if he wasn't senile, he wouldn't have the guts to fight us. He is soft. He spent his whole life hiding behind his wife's skirt. I am doing him a favor. I am taking the burden off his shoulders. I am going to take his company, his wife, and his money, and he won't even know it happened. I stood there frozen. The rage was a physical thing. It felt like hot oil pouring through my veins. I wanted to walk over there and wrap the rake around his neck. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell him that the man hiding behind the skirt was the man who built the fortune he was trying to steal. But I didn't move. I forced myself to breathe. In, out, control. And then I saw it. Preston reached up to wipe sweat from his forehead. The sun caught something on his left wrist, a flash of silver. I focused my eyes. I have always had excellent vision, and I knew watches. I had been a collector for 40 years. It was a chronograph, stainless steel. The dial was a creamy silver with applied Arabic numerals. The bracelet was a specific weave that hadn't been manufactured since the 1940s. My heart stopped beating. The world tilted on its axis. It was a Patek Philippe reference 1518. It wasn't just any watch. It was the first perpetual calendar chronograph ever made in series. It was rare. There were only 281 of them in existence. But this specific one was unique. It had a small scratch on the case back from when my father dropped it on the day I was born. It was my father's watch. It was the watch I had worn when I graduated college. It was the watch I had worn when I signed the first contract for Origin. It was the most valuable thing I owned, not because it was worth $3 million, which it was, but because it was the physical embodiment of my father's legacy. 2 years ago, I had taken it off. I told Catherine I was afraid of damaging it. She told me she would put it in the safety deposit box at the bank. She swore to me that it was locked away in a vault where no one could touch it. She had lied. She hadn't put it in a vault. She had given it to him. She had taken the sacred symbol of my family's history and given it to her boy toy to wear while he hacked up a golf course and bragged about destroying me. I watched Preston tap the face of the watch carelessly. "Nice watch, is that new one?" of his friends asked. "This old thing," Preston said, glancing at it. "Yeah, it is a gift from Catherine. Some vintage junk she found in the old man's drawer. It looks okay with a suit though, right?" Vintage junk. He called my father's legacy vintage junk. The air in my lungs turned to fire. The betrayal was absolute. The money was one thing. The company was one thing. Even the infidelity I could almost understand. But this was a desecration. It was a violation of the dead. I looked at Preston Hayes, and for the first time I didn't see a rival. I didn't see a business problem. I saw a dead man walking. He just didn't know it yet. He got into the cart and drove off toward his ball, laughing with his friends. The sunlight glinted off the watch one last time, a beacon of stolen honor. I dropped the rake. My hands were shaking again, but not from fear. They were shaking from the effort of holding back the violence that wanted to explode out of me. I turned and walked back toward the maintenance shed. I walked with a heavy, deliberate purpose. Catherine had crossed the final line. She had not only broken her vows, she had sold my soul. She had given away the only thing that truly mattered to me. I reached my truck and climbed inside. I slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. I gripped the steering wheel and stared at the clubhouse in the distance. "You want the watch, Preston?" I whispered, my voice sounding like gravel grinding together. "You can keep the watch for now. Wear it. Enjoy it. Because it is going to be the evidence that sends you to prison." I pulled out my phone. I didn't call Catherine. I didn't call Mallory. I called the one person left in this world who hadn't lied to me yet. "Leonard," I said, when my lawyer answered. "Gerald, is everything okay?" Leonard asked, sounding surprised to hear from me in the middle of the day. "No, Leonard. Nothing is okay," I said. "But it is about to be. I need you to hire a private investigator. I need high-resolution photos. And Leonard, I need you to find the serial number for the Patek Philippe 1518 listed in my father's estate probate." "Why, Gerald? What is going on?" "Just do it, Leonard, and get the papers ready for the golden share. We are not waiting for the meeting next week. We are moving now." I hung up. I looked at the golf course one last time. The game was over. They thought they were playing golf. They didn't realize they had just stepped into a minefield, and I was holding the detonator. I parked my truck 2 blocks away from the cafe. It was a place called the Velvet Grind, tucked away in an alley of the Arts District, where the baristas had tattoos up to their necks, and the coffee cost $7 a cup. It was the kind of place where people went to be seen by the right crowd, or in this case, to hide from the wrong one. I pulled my baseball cap lower over my eyes and checked my reflection in the side mirror. I looked like a retired contractor, a nobody. It was the perfect camouflage. I had followed Mallory's red Porsche here. She drove fast, weaving through traffic with an entitlement that made me cringe. She parked in a loading zone, not caring about the ticket she would inevitably get. Daddy would pay it. Or at least she thought Daddy would pay it. I walked into the cafe. The air was thick with the smell of roasted beans and expensive cologne. It was dark inside, illuminated by vintage Edison bulbs that cast long, dramatic shadows. I scanned the room. It didn't take long to find them. They were sitting in a booth at the far back, away from the windows, huddled together like conspirators planning a coup. Mallory was there. And sitting across from her, leaning in with that predatory grin, was Preston Hayes. My stomach churned. Seeing my wife with him was one thing. That was a betrayal of vows, a betrayal of adult promises. But seeing my daughter with him, that felt like a violation of nature. He was her mother's lover. He was the man destroying her family. And there she was, smiling at him. I ordered a black coffee to justify my presence and took a seat at a small table behind a large decorative fern. I was close enough to hear them if I concentrated, but hidden enough that they wouldn't spot me unless they were looking. And they weren't looking for me. In their minds, Gerald Dawson was at home spilling coffee on rugs and napping in his armchair. I slipped my phone out of my pocket and set it on the table face down with the voice recorder running. I put in my earbuds not to listen to music, but to amplify the sound from the phone's microphone. The technology was amazing. I could hear the clink of Mallory's spoon against her ceramic mug as clearly as if I were holding it. "You brought it?" Preston asked. His voice was low, smooth, dripping with false charm. Mallory nodded. She reached into her oversized designer tote bag. I watched her hand disappear inside. I remembered that bag. I had bought it for her in Milan 3 years ago when she got her first promotion. I remembered how she had hugged me, how she had told me I was the best dad in the world. She pulled out a thick manila envelope. It wasn't just any envelope. It had the red confidential stamp of Origen's legal department on the corner. "Here," she said, sliding it across the polished wood table. "This is everything. The R&D projections for the next 5 years, the pending patent applications, and the personal financial disclosures Dad keeps in his safe." Preston placed his hand over the envelope. He didn't open it immediately. He just stroked the paper like it was a lover's skin. "You are amazing, Mal," he said. "You know that, right? We couldn't do this without you. Your mother is great, but she gets emotional. You have a killer instinct, just like me." Mallory giggled. It was a sound that curdled my blood. She was flirting with him, not sexually perhaps, but intellectually. She was preening under his praise. She wanted his approval more than she wanted her own father's dignity. "I just want this to be over," she said, taking a sip of her latte. "Dad is becoming such a burden. You should have seen him this morning. He spilled coffee everywhere. He was trembling like a leaf. It was pathetic, honestly. He is deteriorating so fast." I gripped the edge of my table. My knuckles turned white. "I wasn't trembling this morning, Mallory. I was acting." But hearing her describe me with such disdain, such cold detachment, broke something inside me that I didn't know was still intact. "Is he going to be a problem with the sale?" Preston asked. Mallory shook her head. Her ponytail swished back and forth. "No way. I already talked to Dr. Aris. We are building a file. Every time he forgets a name, every time he drops something, we document it. We have enough to petition for emergency guardianship." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Once we get the signature on the medical power of attorney, we can put him in that facility up in Vermont. The one with the nice gardens. He can stare at the trees all day and tell his war stories to the nurses. He won't know the difference." And then Preston asked, a cruel smile playing on his lips. And then Mallory smiled back, a mirror image of his greed. "And then you and Mom can finally stop hiding. You can get married. You can run the company the way it should be run, without an anchor dragging you down. We will be a real power family." I closed my eyes. Tears pricked at the corners, hot and stinging. A nursing home, Vermont. They weren't just planning to steal my money. They were planning to exile me. They wanted to lock me away in the cold mountains, hundreds of miles from the home I built from the city I loved. They wanted to bury me alive so they could play house with my legacy. And my daughter, my little girl who used to sit on my shoulders at parades, she was the architect of my prison. I thought about all the times I had defended her. When she crashed her first car, I didn't yell. I asked if she was okay. When she wanted to change majors 3 times in college, I paid the tuition without a word. When she wanted that job at the company, I created a position for her, not because she earned it, but because I wanted her close. I had loved her with a blindness that only a parent can understand. And she had used that love as a weapon. She saw my kindness as weakness. She saw my generosity as stupidity. The recording on my phone continued to spin, capturing every syllable of their treachery. "He won't fight back," Preston said. "He doesn't have the stomach for it. He doesn't have the mind for it," Mallory corrected him. "He is gone, Preston. The dad I knew is gone. Now there is just this shell. Honestly, it is a mercy. We are doing him a favor. A mercy." She called it a mercy. I opened my eyes. The tears were gone. They had evaporated in the heat of a new, profound realization. I had no daughter. Mallory Dawson died the moment she handed that envelope across the table. The woman sitting there was a stranger. A stranger with my last name and my nose, but with a heart made of stone. I looked at the phone. The timer read 12 minutes and 45 seconds. I had enough. I had the conspiracy. I had the admission of medical fraud. I had the theft of trade secrets. I reached out and stopped the recording. I saved the file. I named it simply "The End of Mallory." I stood up. My legs felt heavy as if I were wading through mud. I left my coffee untouched on the table. I didn't look back at the booth. I didn't need to see them again. The image of their smiling faces as they plotted my demise was burned into my retinas forever. I walked out of the cafe into the bright, harsh sunlight of the afternoon. The city noise washed over me, sirens, honking cars, the chatter of pedestrians. It all sounded distant, muffled by the ringing in my ears. I walked to my truck. I unlocked the door and climbed inside. I sat there for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. A father's love is supposed to be unconditional. That is what they tell you. But they don't tell you what happens when that love is rejected, mocked, and sold for a few shares of stock. They don't tell you that a heart can only break so many times before it turns into iron. I started the engine. The rumble of the V8 was comforting. It was real. It was loyal. I put the truck in gear. I wasn't going home, not yet. I had one more stop to make. I had to go to the bank. I had to empty the safe deposit box that Mallory thought she had access to. And then I had to go see Leonard. Because if they wanted to treat me like a stranger, I would show them how a stranger conducts business. And strangers don't give second chances. "Goodbye, Mallory," I whispered to the empty cab. "I hope the money is worth it, because it is the last thing you will ever get from me." I walked through the front door of my house, and I knew immediately that I had walked into a trap. The atmosphere in the living room was suffocatingly staged. Catherine was sitting on the sofa, her hands clasped in her lap, in a pose of exaggerated concern. Sitting opposite her in my favorite armchair was a man I had never met. He was thin and bald with wire-rimmed glasses and a suit that was too shiny. He looked less like a healer and more like an undertaker who worked on commission. "Gerald," Catherine said, standing up and rushing over to me. Her voice was pitched high, trembling with fake anxiety. "Thank God you are home. This is Dr. Aris. He is a specialist in geriatric cognitive health. I was just so worried after the incident with the coffee this morning and the way you have been forgetting things, so I asked him to make a house call." I looked at Dr. Aris. He did not stand up to shake my hand. He just observed me scribbling something in a leather notebook. I knew exactly what was happening. This was the final step. They needed a medical professional to sign off on my incapacity. They needed a piece of paper that said Gerald Dawson does not know who he is or what he owns so that they could take it all. I had a choice to make. I could kick this man out. I could scream that I was perfectly sane. I could show them the evidence I had gathered, but that would be a mistake. If I fought back now, they would just find another doctor, or maybe they would get desperate and try something more physical. No. I needed them to think they had won. I needed them to lower their shields. I decided to give the performance of a lifetime. I let my shoulders slump. I relaxed the muscles in my face until my jaw hung slightly loose. I blinked rapidly, as if I were trying to clear a fog from my brain. "Doctor," I mumbled, letting my voice crack. "I do not need a doctor. I just came back from the place." I let the sentence trail off into nothingness. Dr. Aris stood up then. He walked over to me. He smelled of antiseptic and stale cigarettes. He shone a small penlight into my eyes. "Mr. Dawson," he said, his voice flat and clinical. "Can you tell me your full name?" "Gerald," I said. "Gerald Arthur Dawson. Good. And do you know what year it is, Gerald?" I paused. I looked at the calendar on the wall. I looked at Catherine. She was biting her lip, watching me with the intensity of a hawk. "It is 19, I started, then stopped. "No, it is 20-something. "Is it 2024, Gerald?" the doctor pressed. "I don't know," I whispered. "I suppose so. Time goes so fast." Dr. Aris made a note in his book. He guided me to the sofa. I sat down heavily, letting my hands tremble on my knees. I amplified the tremor I had used with Mallory this morning. I made my hands shake so much that they looked like dried leaves in a gale. Catherine sat next to me. She put a hand on my shaking knee. Her touch was cold. "It is okay, honey," she said. "Just answer the questions." Dr. Aris pulled a chair close to me. "Gerald, I am going to say 3 words. I want you to repeat them back to me. Are you ready?" I nodded, staring blankly at his tie. "Apple, penny, table. Apple, penny, table," I repeated. "Good. Now tell me, Gerald, who is the President of the United States?" I furrowed my brow. I made a show of struggling to retrieve the information. "The President," I said. "It is. The man on the television. He has the hair." Dr. Aris didn't wait for an answer. He moved on. "What is 100 minus 7? 93, my brain screamed instantly, but I didn't say that. 100 minus 7, I repeated slowly. 80. 82. I saw a small smile tug at the corner of the doctor's mouth. He was enjoying this. He was getting exactly what he had been paid for. "Now, Gerald, do you remember the 3 words I asked you to repeat earlier?" I looked at him with wide, innocent eyes. 3 words I asked. "You asked me 3 words." "Yes, just a minute ago." I looked at Catherine. I looked around the room. I started to breathe faster, feigning a panic attack. "I don't remember any words. Why are you asking me these things?" "I just want to watch the news." "Where is my paper?" "I had my paper this morning." Dr. Aris closed his notebook with a snap. The sound echoed in the silent room. He looked at Catherine and nodded. It was a subtle nod, but it spoke volumes. It meant we have enough. It meant he is gone. But I had one final card to play. The pièce de résistance. The moment that would seal their confidence and their doom. I turned to Catherine. I looked at her face, the face I had woken up next to for 35 years. I looked at her with a mixture of confusion and childlike affection. I reached out and touched her cheek. "Mother," I whispered. Catherine froze. Her eyes widened. "Mother, are you making the roast beef tonight?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Dad will be home soon. We shouldn't keep him waiting." For a second, Catherine looked horrified. But then the horror was replaced by something else. Triumph. Pure, unadulterated triumph. I had just confused my 58-year-old wife with my mother, who had been dead for 40 years. It was the ultimate proof of cognitive collapse. "I am not your mother, Gerald," Catherine said, but her voice lacked any real correction. She stood up. "I am going to talk to the doctor in the hall. You stay here." She walked Dr. Aris to the hallway. I stayed on the sofa staring at the unlit fireplace, rocking back and forth slightly. I strained my ears. "He is completely regressed," Dr. Aris said, his voice low but audible. "The disorientation is severe. The confusion of identity is a classic symptom of advanced dementia. I can have the competency report ready by tomorrow morning. You will have full guardianship by Friday." "Thank you, Dr. Catherine said. You have no idea what a relief this is. It has been so hard watching him fade away." I heard the front door open and close. Dr. Aris was gone. And then I heard another voice, a voice that had been hiding in the shadows. "Is he gone?" It was Preston. He had been in the kitchen the whole time listening. "Yes," Catherine said. "Did you hear him? He called me mother." "It is pathetic." Preston laughed. It was a cruel, ugly sound. "It is perfect," he said. "The old fool just handed us the keys to the kingdom. We did it, Cat. We actually did it." I heard their footsteps coming back toward the living room. I quickly resumed my blank stare. I saw them standing in the doorway. Preston had his arm around Catherine. They were looking at me not as a person, but as an object, a broken piece of furniture that they were about to throw away. "Look at him," Preston sneered. "He doesn't even know we are here. He is in another dimension." "Let him stay there," Catherine said. "It makes things easier. I will call the lawyers. We sign the papers tomorrow." They turned and walked away. I heard the pop of a cork. They were opening champagne. They were celebrating my demise in my own kitchen, drinking my wine, plotting my exile. I sat there alone in the living room. I stopped rocking. I stopped trembling. My hands became steady as rocks. A cold smile spread across my face. "You think I am in another dimension," I thought. "You are right. I am in a dimension where I am 5 steps ahead of you." They thought the war was over. They thought they had captured the king. But they had forgotten the most important rule of the game. Never assume your opponent is dead until you have checked the pulse yourself. I stood up silently and walked to the window. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass. The frail, confused old man was gone. Gerald Dawson was back, and he was ready for the final act. "Enjoy the champagne, Preston," I whispered. "It will be the last drink you ever enjoy in freedom. Tomorrow, when you walk into that meeting, you won't be facing a senile old man. You will be facing the executioner." I stood outside the building on 42nd Street. It was an old brick structure, dwarfed by the glass skyscrapers surrounding it, much like Leonard Katz himself. Leonard was a relic, a dinosaur from an era when a handshake meant something, and lawyers wore 3-piece suits even in July. He had been my personal attorney for 40 years, but I hadn't seen him in 5. Catherine had convinced me that Leonard was too slow, too old-fashioned for the modern speed of Origen. She had moved all our business to a shiny firm with glass walls and young sharks. But Leonard had something those sharks didn't have. He had the original files, and he had loyalty. I walked into the lobby. The doorman, a man named Russo, who had been there since the 80s, squinted at me. "Mr. Dawson," he asked, his voice rough with disbelief. "Is that you? We haven't seen you in years. I heard you weren't doing so well." I smiled, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't the apologetic smile of a confused old man. It was the sharp, confident smile of a man who owned the building. I am doing just fine, Rousseau, I said, slipping him a $50 bill. Better than fine. I am back in business. I took the elevator to the 12th floor. The office smelled of old paper mahogany polish and cigar smoke. It was a smell that reminded me of victory. I walked past the surprised receptionist and pushed open the heavy double doors to Leonard's private office. Leonard was sitting behind a desk that looked like a fortress of legal briefs. He was 75 with wild white hair and eyes that were still as sharp as diamonds. He was dictating something to a recorder, but he stopped when he saw me. He didn't just stop. He dropped the recorder. It clattered onto the desk. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes as if he were seeing a ghost. "Gerald," he whispered. "My God. Catherine told me you were in a facility in Switzerland. She told me you had early onset dementia. She said you couldn't even recognize your own reflection." I walked over to the leather chair opposite him and sat down. I didn't slump. I crossed my legs and leaned back with the ease of a man who has nothing to hide. "She lied, Leonard," I said calmly. "She has been lying about a lot of things." Leonard stared at me for a long moment. Then a slow grin spread across his face. It was the grin of a man who smells a fight. "I knew it," he said, slamming his hand on the desk. "I knew that woman was a snake. I tried to tell you 30 years ago, Gerald. I told you she was too ambitious for her own good. But you were in love." "I was," I admitted. "Love makes you blind, Leonard. But betrayal gives you 20/20 vision." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the flash drive I had taken from Catherine's computer. I also pulled out the recording of Mallory and Preston. "They are trying to sell the company, Leonard. They have a buyer lined up, a $2 billion deal, and they are planning to declare me incompetent tomorrow so they can push it through without my interference. They are going to ship me off to a nursing home in Vermont and split the money." Leonard's face turned red. He grabbed a notepad. "That is fraud," he barked. "That is conspiracy. We can bury them in litigation for 10 years. I will file an injunction this afternoon." "No," I said, raising my hand. "No injunctions. No lawsuits. Not yet." That is what they expect. They expect a legal battle. They have an army of corporate lawyers ready for that. I want to end this in one stroke. I want to decapitate the snake, not just wrestle with it. I leaned forward. "I need you to pull the original incorporation documents from 1990. Not the digital copies. The physical originals. The ones we signed in this very room when Origen was just an idea on a napkin." Leonard looked confused, but he stood up and walked over to a wall of filing cabinets. He unlocked a drawer labeled D and pulled out a dusty yellowing file. He blew the dust off it and laid it on the desk. "I remember this," he said, flipping through the pages. "You insisted on some very specific clauses. You wanted to protect Catherine from a hostile takeover." "Keep looking," I said. "Look for the class structure of the shares." Leonard turned the pages. His finger traced the lines of legal text. Suddenly he stopped. His eyes widened. He looked up at me and then back down at the paper. He started to laugh. It started as a chuckle and grew into a roaring belly laugh that shook his frame. "You sly old fox," he wheezed. I had forgotten about this. "The golden share." "Read it," I said. "Read it out loud." Leonard cleared his throat. He adjusted his glasses and read with the solemnity of a judge passing a sentence. "Class A shares shall be held by the board of directors. Class B shares shall be held by public investors. However, one single share designated as the founder's share or golden share shall be retained by Gerald Arthur Dawson. This share holds zero economic value, but carries absolute veto power over any merger, acquisition, sale of assets, or dissolution of the company. This right supersedes any board vote, shareholder majority, or executive order." He looked up at me, his eyes gleaming. "Absolute veto power," he repeated. Gerald, do you realize what this means? They can have 99% of the stock. They can have the entire board in their pocket. They can have the Pope's blessing. But without this one share, they cannot sell a single paperclip. Exactly, I said. Catherine thinks she runs the company because she has the title of CEO. She thinks she owns it because she has the majority of the common stock. But she forgot the foundation. She forgot that I built the house and I kept the master key. Leonard sat back, shaking his head in admiration. Why didn't you tell her, he asked. Why did you let her think she had total control all these years? Because I wanted her to feel powerful, I said, a wave of sadness washing over me. I wanted her to feel like she did it on her own. I didn't want to be the husband who held a leash. I wanted to be a partner. But she didn't want a partner, Leonard. She wanted a victim. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Catherine and Preston were clinking champagne glasses, thinking they had won. Does the current board know about this? Leonard asked. I doubt it, I said. This document has been buried in your archives for 30 years. The digital records at the company only show the modern share structure. Catherine probably shredded her copy decades ago. She thinks it doesn't exist. She thinks I am just a silent investor with no power. Leonard stood up and walked over to me. He put a hand on my shoulder. So what is the play, Gerald? Do we send a cease and desist letter? Do we call a meeting? No, I said, turning to face him. We do nothing. We let them proceed. We let them walk into that press conference tomorrow. We let them stand on that stage and announce the sale to the world. We let them believe right up until the last second that they have gotten away with it. And then Leonard asked, a wicked smile playing on his lips. And then I said, buttoning my jacket, I am going to walk in. I am going to introduce myself, and I am going to use this golden share to crush them. I want you to be there, Leonard. Bring the police, bring the FBI, because once I stop the sale, I am going to expose the fraud. Leonard nodded. He went back to his desk and picked up the phone. I will call my contact at the district attorney's office, he said. If they falsified medical records to force a guardianship, that is a felony. If they transferred IP to an offshore shell company, that is grand larceny. Gerald, by this time tomorrow, your wife won't be a CEO. She will be an inmate. I walked to the door. One more thing, Leonard, I said. Yes, Gerald. Get me a tailor, and get me a barber. If I am going to rise from the dead, I want to look the part. I am done looking like the victim. Tomorrow, the world meets the real Gerald Dawson. I walked out of the office. The air in the hallway felt lighter. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of my age. I felt the thrill of the hunt. They had poked the bear. They had mocked the bear. They had tried to skin the bear while it was sleeping. Now the bear was awake, and he was hungry. The night before the biggest day of my life was strangely calm. I sat in the guest bedroom, which had become my sanctuary over the last few weeks. The house was quiet, but it was not a peaceful silence. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a courtroom before the verdict is read. Outside, the wind was howling through the oaks, but inside, the air was stagnant. I had spent the last hour polishing my shoes. It was a meditative act. The rhythmic motion of the cloth against the leather helped me organize my thoughts. Tomorrow, I would step onto a stage and destroy the lives of the two people who had betrayed me. It was a heavy burden, but my hands were steady. There was a soft knock on the door. It was a perfunctory knock, the kind you give before entering a room you own. Catherine walked in without waiting for an answer. She was wearing a silk robe that shimmered in the dim light. She held a glass of white wine in one hand and a thin document in the other. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, and for a fleeting second, she looked like the woman I had married 35 years ago. But then she spoke and the illusion shattered. Gerald, she said, her voice brisk and businesslike, I need you to sign this. She placed the paper on the small writing desk in the corner. I did not get up immediately. I finished polishing the left shoe, setting it down gently next to its mate. Then I stood up and walked over to the desk. "What is it?" I asked, playing the role of the confused husband one last time. "It is just a formality," she said, taking a sip of wine. "It is a proxy form for the shareholder meeting tomorrow, since Dr. Aris says you are not well enough to attend. This just allows me to represent your interests. It saves you the stress of the crowds and the noise. You know how you get with loud noises lately." I looked at the document. It was a standard proxy form, but with a clause added at the bottom, giving her irrevocable power to vote on all merger-related matters. If I signed this legally and validly, I would be handing her the knife to cut my own throat. I picked up the pen she had placed on the paper. It was a cheap plastic ballpoint. "I don't like this pen," I muttered. "It feels too light." "Where is my pen?" Catherine sighed, rolling her eyes. "Gerald, it is just a signature." "Use the pen." "No," I said stubbornly, opening the drawer. "I want my pen. The heavy one." I rummaged in the drawer and pulled out a silver fountain pen. Catherine did not know that this pen was a relic from my days in corporate espionage. I had bought it in Berlin in the late 80s. It was filled with a very special ink. It looked black and permanent when it hit the paper, but within 12 hours it would oxidize and vanish completely, leaving no trace that it had ever been there. By the time anyone checked the records, this document would be a blank sheet of paper. I uncapped the pen. My hand hovered over the signature line. "Where do I sign?" I asked, looking up at her. "Right there, Gerald," she said, tapping the line impatiently. "Next to the X. Just sign it so I can go to sleep. We have a big day tomorrow." I lowered the pen. I wrote my name slowly. Gerald Arthur Dawson. I added a small flourish at the end, just like I used to. "There," I said, capping the pen. "All done." Catherine snatched the paper from the desk. She blew on the ink to dry it. She looked at the signature and smiled. It was the smile of a predator who has finally caught the rabbit. "Good," she said. "Now you can just relax here tomorrow. I will have the nurse bring you breakfast in bed. You won't have to worry about a thing." She turned to leave. She had what she came for. I was no longer of any use to her. "Catherine," I said. She stopped at the door, her hand on the frame. She turned back, looking annoyed. "What now, Gerald?" I looked at her. I really looked at her. I searched her face for any sign of guilt, any flicker of hesitation. I wanted to see if there was any humanity left under the layers of ambition and greed. "Are you happy?" I asked softly. She frowned, confused by the question. "What kind of question is that?" "I mean it," I said. "You have the company, you have the money, you have Preston, you have pushed me out of your life. Is this what happiness feels like to you?" Catherine laughed. It was a cold, hollow sound that chilled me to the bone. She leaned against the doorframe, swirling the wine in her glass. "Happiness is a fairy tale for poor people, Gerald," she said. "Happiness is fleeting. You eat a good meal, you are happy for an hour. You go on vacation, you are happy for a week. But power is permanent. Control is permanent." She took a step closer, her eyes hardening. "For 30 years, I lived in your shadow. I was Mrs. Gerald Dawson, the trophy wife, the figurehead. Tomorrow, when that deal closes, I will be Catherine Dawson, the woman who brokered the biggest biotech merger of the decade. I will be on the cover of magazines. I will have respect. That is better than happiness." She took a long sip of her wine, finishing the glass. "So, yes, Gerald, I am happy. Or I will be tomorrow at noon. Now go to sleep. You look tired." She turned and walked out, closing the door behind her. I heard her heels clicking down the hallway, moving toward the master bedroom, where Preston was undoubtedly waiting. I stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door. Her words echoed in my mind. Happiness is a fairy tale for poor people. I felt a strange sense of relief. I had given her a chance. I had given her an opening to show remorse, and she had spat on it. Any lingering guilt I had about what I was going to do tomorrow evaporated. She had made her choice. Now she would have to live with the consequences. I walked over to the bed and sat down. I reached under the mattress and pulled out a burner phone I had bought 2 days ago. I dialed a number I had memorized. It rang once. Kat's law office, a gruff voice answered. "It is me," I said. Gerald Leonard said. "I have been waiting for your call. Is everything in place?" "Yes," I said. "She has the proxy form. Did you sign it?" "I signed it with the Berlin pen," I said. "It will be blank by the time the judge asks for it." Leonard chuckled darkly. "Classic. And the golden share." "I have the original certificate in my jacket pocket," I said. "It is safe," Good Leonard said. "I have the team ready. The forensic accountant has finished his report on the offshore transfers. The private investigator has the photos of Preston wearing the watch and the audio of your daughter. And I have spoken to the district attorney. He is very interested in the medical fraud aspect. He is sending 2 agents to accompany us." "Agents?" I asked. "Yes, Gerald. This is not just a civil dispute anymore. This is a criminal takedown. We are going to arrest them, Gerald. On live television." I took a deep breath. I looked around the guest room. This would be my last night in this house that was built on lies. "Do it," I said. "Activate Omega Plan." "What time do you want us there?" Leonard asked. "The press conference starts at 11, I said. "I will make my entrance at 11:15. I want you and the agents to secure the exits at 11:10. Nobody leaves that room until I am done speaking." "Understood," Leonard said. "Get some rest, Gerald. Tomorrow we hunt sharks." I hung up the phone. I destroyed the SIM card and flushed it down the toilet. I undressed and climbed into bed. I thought I would be awake all night, but a strange calm settled over me. I was not a victim anymore. I was the CEO of my own destiny. I closed my eyes and visualized the look on Catherine's face when I walked through those doors. I visualized the fear in Preston's eyes. I visualized the justice that was coming like a freight train. Happiness might be a fairy tale, I thought as I drifted off to sleep. But revenge. Revenge is very real. And tomorrow it is going to be served cold. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel smelled of white lilies and expensive champagne. It was the smell of victory for the people inside. Through the crack in the double mahogany doors, I could hear the murmur of 300 voices. These were the elite of the business world. Hedge fund managers from Wall Street, tech giants from Silicon Valley, and journalists from every major financial publication on the planet. They were all there to witness the coronation of the new king and queen of Origin. I watched the live feed on my phone for a moment. Catherine was standing at the podium. She looked radiant in a white dress that I knew cost $5,000 because I had seen the bill on the credit card statement I wasn't supposed to see. She was smiling that practiced smile, the one that didn't reach her eyes. Next to her stood Preston Hayes. He was trying to look humble, but his chest was puffed out like a rooster. He was nodding along to her speech, pretending he had built the company that was about to be sold for $2 billion. "We are so proud," Catherine said into the microphone, her voice amplified by the state-of-the-art sound system. "We are proud to announce that Origin is taking the next step in its evolution. This acquisition is not just a sale. It is a partnership for the future." I put the phone in my pocket. That was enough. I had heard enough lies for one lifetime. I turned to the mirror in the hallway. The man staring back at me was not the broken old husband who spilled coffee on rugs. That man had died last night. The man in the mirror was Gerald Arthur Dawson. I was wearing a navy blue bespoke suit cut from the finest vicuna wool. It had been tailored by a master in London, a man who knew how to make fabric drape like armor. It cost $10,000 and it fit me like a second skin. My shirt was crisp white Egyptian cotton. My tie was a deep crimson silk the color of blood and power. On my feet were Italian leather Oxfords polished to a mirror shine. I adjusted my cuffs. I felt the weight of the golden share certificate in my inside pocket. It was just a piece of paper, but it weighed more than the entire building. I walked toward the main entrance of the ballroom. There were 2 security guards standing there. They were big men wearing earpieces and ill-fitting black suits. They were hired muscle. They had a list on a tablet and they were checking every face against it. One of them stepped forward as I approached. He held up a hand. "Sir, the event is closed to the public," he said. His voice was bored. He didn't look at my face. He looked at my suit. He saw money, but he didn't see an invitation. I did not stop walking. I did not slow down. "I am not the public," I said. My voice was low and steady. It was the voice I used to use when I fired people. The guard frowned. He looked at his tablet. "Name?" he asked. "You won't find it on that list," I said. "Then you are not coming in, sir. Please turn around, or we will have to escort you out." He reached out to touch my arm. It was a mistake. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a card. It was not a paper invitation. It was a thick, heavy rectangle made of black anodized titanium. There were no numbers on it. Just the Origen logo etched in gold and the word Founder. There were only 2 of these cards in existence. I had one. The other was locked in a safe in the CEO's office. I held the card up to the scanner mounted on the wall. The guard scoffed. "That machine is for employees only," he started to say. The scanner beeped. It wasn't the usual short beep. It was a long melodic chime that hadn't been heard in this building for years. The LED light on the door panel didn't just turn green. It pulsed with a bright, authoritative emerald light. The screen above the scanner flashed a message in bold letters. "Access granted. Welcome, Chairman Dawson." The guard looked at the screen. Then he looked at me. His eyes went wide. He realized instantly that he had made a terrible error. He realized that the man in front of him was not a gatecrasher, but the owner of the gate. I stepped forward. The guard scrambled out of the way, pulling the heavy door open for me. "My apologies." "Mr. Dawson," he stammered. "I didn't know. I didn't answer him. I didn't even look at him. I walked through the open door and into the lion's den." The atmosphere inside the ballroom changed the instant I crossed the threshold. It is hard to describe, but when true power enters a room, the air pressure seems to drop. The chatter didn't stop all at once. It rippled into silence. It started at the back of the room where I entered and spread forward like a wave. Heads turned. Photographers lowered their cameras to see who had just walked in. Then they raised them again frantically. Flashbulbs started to pop. Not 1 or 2, but hundreds. It was like walking into a lightning storm. I walked down the center aisle. My footsteps on the marble floor were loud and deliberate. Click, clack, click, clack. I didn't rush. I walked with the slow, measured pace of a man who owns the time. On the stage, Catherine froze. She was in the middle of a sentence about synergy, but the words died in her throat. Her mouth hung open slightly. She looked at me, and for a moment she didn't recognize me. She was looking for the gray cardigan. She was looking for the stooped shoulders. Instead, she saw a shark in a $10,000 suit. Preston dropped his water bottle. It rolled across the stage, the sound amplified by the microphone, creating a clumsy thud that echoed through the silent room. He looked like he had seen a ghost. His face went pale. He instinctively reached for his wrist, covering the Patek Philippe watch with his other hand. He knew. In that split second, he knew. I kept walking. I felt the eyes of 500 people on me. I saw the confusion on the faces of the investors. "Who is this?" they were whispering. "Is that the husband? I thought he was sick." "He doesn't look sick. He looks dangerous." I reached the front row, the VIP section. The lawyers were sitting there, including the team from the acquiring company. They looked nervous. They sensed that something was going off script. I stopped 10 feet from the stage. I stood there bathed in the stage lights. I buttoned my jacket. I looked up at Catherine. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The silence was heavy. It was thick with tension. Catherine gripped the podium so hard her knuckles turned white. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. She was paralyzed by the sheer audacity of my presence. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. My suit spoke for me. My posture spoke for me. The cold, hard look in my eyes spoke for me. I looked at Preston. He took a step back, literally retreating from my gaze. I looked at the crowd. I gave a small nod to a journalist I recognized from the Wall Street Journal. He nodded back, his pen poised over his notebook, ready to write the story of the year. Then I looked back at Catherine. I held her gaze until she flinched. "You forgot one thing, Catherine," I thought. "You forgot that lions don't retire. They just wait." I took the first step up the stairs onto the stage. The wood creaked under my weight. The sound was like a gunshot. The king had returned, and the execution was about to begin. "Security, get him out of here!" Preston screamed, his voice cracking with panic. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his face turning a shade of purple that clashed violently with the expensive stage lighting. "Someone remove this crazy old man before he hurts himself. He has dementia. He doesn't know where he is." The 2 security guards who had followed me in stopped at the edge of the stage. They looked at Preston, then they looked at me. They saw the founder badge clipped to my lapel. They saw the bespoke suit. And most importantly, they saw the look of absolute command on my face. They folded their arms and stood down. They knew who signed their paychecks. I stepped up to the podium. Catherine was shrinking away from me, clutching the side of the lectern as if it were a life raft in a storm. I looked at her one last time. There was no love left in my eyes, just a cold pity. I reached out and took the microphone from her hand. She didn't resist. She was too paralyzed by shock. I tapped the microphone twice. Thump, thump. The sound boomed through the speakers, silencing the murmurs of the crowd. "I am not crazy, Preston," I said, my voice deep and steady, resonating in every corner of the ballroom. "And I know exactly where I am. I am standing in the company I built from a garage in Queens, while you were still learning how to tie your shoelaces." I turned to the audience. 500 faces stared back at me. I saw the CEO of the acquiring company, Mr. Tanaka, sitting in the front row, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Ladies and gentlemen," I continued, "my name is Gerald Dawson. For the last 10 years, I have been the silent partner. I stayed in the shadows because I trusted my wife to stand in the light. But silence is not weakness, and trust is not blind." Preston lunged forward, trying to grab the microphone. "Cut the feed," he yelled at the sound booth. "Cut the damn audio." But the sound engineer, a young man named Dave, who I had hired 5 years ago, gave me a thumbs up from the back of the room. The mic stayed live. I sidestepped Preston effortlessly. He stumbled, looking foolish. "Sit down, son," I said sharply. "The adults are talking." I pulled the black titanium card from my pocket and held it up. "You are all here to witness a sale," I said. "You were told that the board approved this merger unanimously. You were told that the majority shareholder gave his proxy. That was a lie. It was all." A gasp went through the room. "I hold the golden share," I announced, my voice rising. "Under the corporate charter of 1990, this share gives me absolute veto power over any sale or dissolution of Origen Biopharma. And as of this moment, I am exercising that power. I looked directly at Mr. Tanaka. The deal is dead. Catherine finally found her voice. She stepped forward, her face twisted with desperation. "Don't listen to him," she shrieked, her voice shrill and hysterical. "He is mentally incompetent. We have a doctor's report. He doesn't know what he is saying. He thinks I am his mother." "Ah, yes, the doctor," I said calmly. "Dr. Aris." I reached into my inside pocket and pulled out a sleek silver remote control. I pointed it at the massive LED screen behind us, the one that was currently displaying the Origen logo and the projected stock price. "Let's hear what Dr. Aris has to say about that." I pressed the button. The logo disappeared. A video file began to play. It was shaky footage taken just an hour ago in an interrogation room. Leonard had been very persuasive. On the giant screen, Dr. Aris looked sweaty and terrified. He was speaking to someone off camera. "I didn't want to do it." He stammered, his face 10 feet tall, looming over the stage. "She paid me $10,000. Catherine Dawson. She gave me the script. I just had to certify that the old man was confused. But he wasn't. He was faking it. I knew he was faking it, but I needed the money." The ballroom erupted. The sound of hundreds of people gasping at once sucked the air out of the room. Flashbulbs went off like a strobe light, blinding and relentless. Catherine let out a strangled cry. She covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes darting around, looking for an escape. But there was nowhere to go. She was trapped in the spotlight of her own making. "I am not done yet," I said, cutting through the noise. I pressed the button again. The screen changed. Now it showed a bank statement, a complex web of wire transfers. "This is a forensic accounting of the last 6 months," I explained, pointing at the screen. $50,000 a month to a shell company owned by Preston Hayes. But that is petty cash compared to this. The image changed to the signed patent transfer agreement. Yesterday, my wife signed over our core intellectual property, the very heart of this company, to an offshore entity in the Cayman Islands. They were going to sell you an empty shell, Mr. Tanaka. They were going to take your $2 billion and keep the technology for themselves. Preston looked like he was about to vomit. He was shaking his head, muttering, "No, no, no," over and over again. "And just so, there is no doubt about their character," I said softly. "I have one last thing to share." I pressed the button a third time. The screen went black, but the audio system crackled to life. It was the recording from the cafe. Mallory's voice filled the room, clear and cruel. "Dad is becoming such a burden. Just sign the medical power of attorney, and we can put him in that facility up in Vermont. Then you and Mom can finally stop hiding." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a grave. I saw people in the front row looking down at their shoes, unable to witness the sheer brutality of the betrayal. I looked at Catherine. She was weeping now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of humiliation. She had been stripped naked in front of the world. Her carefully constructed image of the benevolent matriarch was shattered into a million pieces. Mr. Tanaka stood up slowly. He was a man of immense dignity. He adjusted his suit jacket and buttoned it. He looked up at the stage, not at Catherine or Preston, but at me. He gave a short, respectful bow. "Mr. Dawson," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet room. "The Tanaka Group has a strict code of ethics. We do not do business with thieves, and we certainly do not do business with family betrayers." He turned to his entourage. "We are leaving. Cancel the wire transfer." As he walked out, a dozen other investors followed him. The room began to clear. It was a mass exodus. And then the sound started. It was a digital sound, a series of rapid descending tones coming from the financial terminals set up at the back of the room. I looked up at the screen. The live ticker for Origen stock had replaced the evidence. It was a bloodbath. The numbers were tumbling, red arrows pointing down. The price was free-falling. $70, $60, $40. In a matter of seconds, billions of dollars in market capitalization were evaporating. The wealth that Catherine loved so much, the power she craved, was turning into dust before her eyes. "Look at the screen, Catherine," I said quietly, leaning close to the microphone so only she and Preston could hear me over the chaos. "Look at your happiness. It is going down the drain." Preston sank to his knees. He was staring at the floor, defeated, broken. The Patek Philippe watch on his wrist hung loose, looking heavy and out of place. I walked over to him. I reached down and unclasped the watch from his wrist. He didn't resist. He didn't even look up. "I think this belongs to me," I said. I put the watch in my pocket. It felt warm. It felt right. I walked to the edge of the stage. The journalists were shouting questions, screaming for a comment. "Mr. Dawson, is this the end of Origin?" one yelled. I looked at him and smiled a cold, dangerous smile. "No," I said. "This is just a renovation. We are clearing out the rot. The rebuilding starts tomorrow." I turned and walked off the stage, leaving Catherine sobbing in the wreckage of her ambitions and Preston kneeling in the ruins of his greed. The stock price was still falling, but I didn't care. I could always make more money. But I had bought back something priceless: my dignity. The chaos in the ballroom faded behind me as I stepped into the backstage corridor, but a new kind of noise was just beginning. It was the wail of sirens cutting through the midtown traffic. I walked toward the service exit where Leonard Katz was waiting. He was leaning against the wall, looking like a satisfied cat who had just eaten the canary. Next to him stood 4 men in dark windbreakers with the letters FBI printed in yellow on their backs. Behind them were 2 uniformed officers from the Economic Crimes Division. "They are all yours, Leonard," I said, gesturing toward the stage door where Catherine and Preston were trying to escape the press. Leonard nodded to the agents. They moved with professional efficiency. I turned back to watch. It was a sight I would carry with me to my grave. Preston Hayes, the man who thought he could steal my life, was being pressed against the wall. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by the raw animal panic of a trapped rat. An agent pulled Preston's arms behind his back. The metallic click of the handcuffs was sharper and more satisfying than any sound system. "You cannot do this!" Preston screamed, his voice cracking. "I am the COO of a billion-dollar company. This is a mistake. Call my lawyer." "You don't need a corporate lawyer, son," Leonard said, stepping forward, his voice calm and dry. "You need a criminal defense attorney. And a good one. We have the bank records from the Cayman Islands. We have the wire transfers. We have the testimony of Dr. Aris regarding the medical fraud. You are looking at 20 years for embezzlement, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud." I watched as they marched Preston past me. He looked at me, his eyes wide and pleading. He looked at the empty spot on his wrist where my father's watch used to be. He opened his mouth to say something, maybe to beg, maybe to curse, but no sound came out. He was already a ghost. Catherine was next. She wasn't in handcuffs yet, but she was surrounded. An officer was reading her rights. She stood there in her expensive white dress, shaking uncontrollably. Her makeup was running down her cheeks in black streaks. She saw me standing in the shadows. "Gerald," she cried out, reaching toward me. "Gerald, tell them. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. I am your wife. We can fix this. Please don't let them take me." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had planned to lock me in a nursing home so she could spend my money with her lover. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. The heavy stone of betrayal that had been sitting there for months was gone. "I cannot help you, Catherine," I said softly. "I am just a senile old man, remember. I probably wouldn't be a reliable witness." The officers escorted her away. She was screaming my name, but I turned my back. The chapter was closed. The book was burned. I started walking down the long hallway toward the lobby. My footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. I was tired, but it was a good tired. It was the exhaustion of a soldier coming home after winning the war. But I wasn't out of the building yet. There was one last loose end to tie up. "Daddy, wait." The voice echoed down the corridor. I stopped. I didn't turn around immediately. I took a deep breath. This was the hardest part. Not the police, not the board, but this. Mallory came running up to me. She was out of breath. Her face was flushed and her eyes were wet with tears. She grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight, desperate. "Daddy," she sobbed. "Oh my God, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what they were doing. Mom and Preston, they lied to me too. They told me you were sick. They told me they were trying to help you. I was just trying to protect you." I looked down at her hand on my sleeve. It was the same hand that had pushed the medical power of attorney across the table yesterday. It was the same hand that had handed over my confidential files in the cafe. I gently removed her hand from my arm. I stepped back, creating a physical distance between us. "Stop acting Mallory," I said. My voice was cold, colder than I thought it could ever be toward my own child. "I heard the recording. I heard you call me a burden. I heard you laugh about putting me in a facility. You weren't tricked. You were recruiting." Mallory's face crumbled. She switched tactics instantly. The tears stopped and a look of panic set in. "Daddy, please," she said, her voice trembling. "You can't leave me with this mess. The company stock is worthless. My job is gone. How am I going to live? I have the mortgage on the condo. I have the car payments." I looked at her and I saw a stranger. I didn't see the little girl I used to read bedtime stories to. I saw a 30-year-old woman who had chosen greed over blood. "You are a smart girl, Mallory," I said, reaching into my pocket. "You have a master's degree from a top university. A degree I paid for. I am sure you will figure it out." I pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to her. "What is this?" she asked, unfolding it with shaking hands. "That is a copy of the transfer order I sent to my lawyers this morning," I said. "I have liquidated your trust fund. Every cent of your inheritance, which was substantial, has been donated to the Veterans Legal Defense Fund. It is a charity that helps old soldiers who have been taken advantage of. I thought it was fitting." Mallory stared at the paper, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "You can't do that," she whispered. "That is my money." "It was never your money," I said. "It was my money, and now it is gone. Good luck, Mallory. You are on your own." I turned and walked away. I heard her screaming behind me, screaming that it wasn't fair, screaming that she hated me. I kept walking. Her words couldn't hurt me anymore. I had cut the cord. I walked out into the main lobby. The sun was streaming through the glass doors. It was a beautiful afternoon. The air conditioning in the building felt stale compared to the promise of the fresh air outside. At the door stood Mike, the security guard, the same young man who had laughed at me just yesterday, who had called me Pops and threatened to call the cops. He was holding the door open. His face was pale. He was trembling slightly. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at his shoes, his posture rigid with fear. He had seen the news. He knew who I was now. He knew he had insulted the man who owned the building he was standing in. "Mr. Dawson," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "Sir, I am so sorry." I didn't know. If I had known. I stopped in front of him. I looked him up and down. He was just a kid who had made a mistake based on appearances, a kid who had learned a hard lesson today. I reached into my wallet and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. I held it out to him. Mike looked at the money, then at me, confusion written all over his face. "Take it," I said. He took the bill, his hand shaking. "Why, sir?" he asked. Consider it a tuition fee, I said. Today you learned something they don't teach in school. Never judge a book by its cover, and never assume a man is weak just because he is kind. Next time, look at the person, not the clothes. I patted him on the shoulder. He flinched, expecting a blow, but I just smiled. Keep the door open, Mike, I said. I am leaving. I walked out onto the sidewalk. My Ford F-150 was parked right where I left it. It looked out of place among the limousines and news vans, but to me it looked like a chariot. I climbed into the cab. The seat was worn and comfortable. The engine roared to life with a familiar grumble. I adjusted the rearview mirror. I saw the towering glass building of Origin one last time. I saw the police lights flashing. I saw the empire I had built and the empire I had just dismantled. I put the truck in gear and pulled away from the curb. I merged into the traffic. I was 72 years old. I was alone. I had lost my wife. I had lost my daughter. I had lost the company I spent my life building. But as I rolled down the window and felt the wind on my face, I realized I hadn't lost the most important thing. I looked at my wrist where my father's watch sat heavy and reassuring. I had my dignity. I had my freedom. And for the first time in 30 years, I was driving toward a destination of my own choosing. I turned on the radio. Classic rock filled the cabin. I tapped my fingers on the steering wheel. I wasn't an old man driving into the sunset. I was a man driving into a new beginning. And this time I would be the one holding the keys. This story is a reminder that the people closest to us are often the ones who can hurt us the most, because we hand them the knife thinking they will protect us. But it also teaches us that it is never too late to take your power back. Dignity is not something you are given, it is something you defend. If you are in a situation where you are being undervalued or used, remember that silence is not consent and kindness is not weakness. Sometimes you have to burn the bridge to stop the enemy from following you. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed this victory of justice over greed, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. I want to know what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have forgiven the daughter, or did she get what she deserved? Let me know in the comments below. See you in the next video.